Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. My name is Tara Thiani. I am one of the co-campus directors for the United States International University, which is based in Nairobi, Kenya. And I'm also delighted to be a moderator for today's webinar. So before we get into the hang of things, now that I've introduced myself, I'd like to invite you all to introduce yourselves in the chat. Tell us your name, the university you're in, and which country you're from. And as you do that, I would also like to congratulate all the Millennium Fellows of the class of 2020 on their graduation. And I would especially like to thank Team MCN for their guidance through this journey and for shaping us into better leaders for tomorrow. So in the course of the webinar, feel free to put any questions you have for our guest speaker in the chat box, and we will get into that towards the last 30 minutes of the webinar, where we'll have the Q&A section. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's guest speaker, Karen Keating Ansara, co-founder of the Ansara Family Fund. Karen and her husband, Jim, make grants to end global poverty, primarily in Haiti, and to build resilient health facilities globally. Karen serves as board chair of the New England International Donors, NEID, a community of hundreds of donors, grant makers, and advisors helping to solve global problems. She also serves on the boards of the Haiti Development Institute, which is an outgrowth of the Haiti Fund at the Boston Foundation, as well as Build Health International and MCE Social Capital. Karen also serves on the Millennium Campus Network's board of directors and helps make the Millennium Fellowship possible. So thank you very much, Karen. A member of Oxfam America's Leadership Council since 2003, Karen and Jim have 4 young adult children and live in Essex, Massachusetts. So Karen, I'd like to turn the floor over to you. Give us an introduction, background, and tell us how you got to where you are right now.
Thank you so much, Tara. I have never been interviewed from someone in Kenya. So this is very exciting. It's wonderful to see everybody's faces here today and to read in the chat where all of you are studying and working to pursue the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. As you heard from Tara, I work with donors. I work with private funders of international development projects. They may be individuals, they may be impact investors, they may be foundations, especially family foundations. I am grateful to UN Academic Impact for partnering with MCN to launch this Millennium Fellowship, to train college students like you from all over the world to become visionary and effective development leaders, people who embody the core values of MCN, of humility, of empathy, and inclusion. No matter what we try to accomplish in the world, the way we show up is as important or more important than what we try to do. It makes all the difference. So you all give me hope that we can work together across sectors, across silos, across countries to achieve the UN's SDGs. I see international development work as having 3 sets of stakeholders. First, there are, and this is paramount, the local community members. Then there are the social impact workers, which I hope you will all become. And then there are the donors who invest in the work. Without the donors, frankly, the work can't happen. So each of these groups, I believe, have to work hand in hand on any development initiative to be successful. So I can stop right there, Tara, if you might have some questions for me, or I can riff.
Thank you very much for that. I have a few questions for you, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
I think the first would be, what made you focus on supporting organizations that address global poverty and equitable health?
Okay, well, that takes me back 40 years, 4 decades ago to my college experience when I first began to learn about the gross inequities in the world in my first semester of college through taking an Intro to Poli-Sci course. I thought I wanted to be an archaeologist, but once I took that course, I was hooked and I knew I wanted to change the world. I acquired some incredible mentors at college, people who introduced me to courageous global social justice advocates. And similar to you, I started organizing on campus to raise awareness about the root causes of global hunger and malnutrition and other causes. And I'll tell you, if the Millennium Fellowship had existed 40 years ago on my campus, I would have been the first to sign up. And I know I would have learned so much more. After college, I worked in public affairs and fundraising for local nonprofits, and I believe I gained indispensable skills for any kind of social impact work, including international development work. Because to propel change, you don't have to go to the field. You don't have to be on the ground. You don't have to travel somewhere else, although that's really helpful. It's very helpful to have the firsthand experience, and you always need to defer, I believe, to the people from the communities that you're trying to serve. But people who have the skills and ability to tell the story about the work and to attract funding to the work are just as important. So don't overlook acquiring those skills and using them. So back to your question though, Tara, about why did we personally decide to focus on global poverty? One was my studies as an undergraduate. But more personally, it was our experience as a family adopting 3 little girls from Ecuador. Once you see the kind of poverty that millions of children are born into every day, something I do not need to tell you folks on the phone about at all. You've seen it. You may have lived it. Once you see that, you cannot turn away. You know you have to do something. So when Jim, my husband, and I had an opportunity to set up a family foundation after he sold a business, we knew that we wanted to try to address the root causes of poverty that lead parents to be so desperate and hopeless that they would have to surrender their children to someone else. So originally, Tara, we thought we would support a lot of orphanages, and we started doing that, but then we realized that wasn't getting to the root of the problem. The root of the problem was lack of human rights, lack of access to basic resources, lack of access to a voice to influence the government, to create an equitable society. And so we tried to get to the root of those problems.
Thank you very much. That answer actually resonates a lot with me and everyone who's joining us today, because I'm sure that's what propelled us into whatever we're doing now, especially in our projects and trying to advance the SDGs. So thank you very much for that. Next, this is a question that I think a number of the fellows would also like to ask later on. But we've seen that you're on a number of boards, very many. So I wanted to ask, how are you able to juggle your workload? How do you do it on a daily basis? Because as a student, that's difficult for me, but you're on like hundreds of boards. How do you do it?
Well, it was really hard for me to juggle my workload when I was in college and graduate school. That is very, very challenging. I don't think I've ever had a more challenging time balancing work than when I was in school. So I feel for you all. I try to choose boards that are going to be mutually enhancing to each other. So ones that have similar foci, similar geography, similar problems. So some of the boards are in Haiti, which is the focus of my family's philanthropy. The MCN board is clearly global and touching every possible issue to improve the world. New England International Donors, which is the network that I founded 12 years ago, is similar to MCN in that way, and that we touch every possible issue. So the learnings that I receive from serving on the boards serving on one board, I hope, helps my activity on another board. So they become mutually reinforcing. And then I use all kinds of colors on Microsoft Outlook to plan my calendar every day.
That's a really good strategy. I think I'm going to start using that because things are hectic at the moment.
There's family, there's MCN, there's need, there's, everybody's got a different color. Because I have 4 kids too. I mean, that's the other thing that, you all will realize if you're not already parents, that the most important job you will have in your life is being a parent and raising your children with the kind of values that you're embodying now, and helping them to be positive contributors to the world. So there's a lot of time management involved. It gets more complicated as you start a family.
Thank you so much for that wonderful answer. I think that's going to help us now and in the future, especially that color coding. That's something I'll start doing tonight. So now that you've mentioned the New England international donors, could you maybe tell us about how it's grown and what your hopes are for NIED in the future?
Thanks, Tara. That's a great question. We founded this network 12 years ago in New England, that sort of the Northeast area of the United States, because we learned 12 years ago that Americans were only giving 2% of all their philanthropic dollars to solve global problems. And we wanted to inspire them to give much more, to realize that we're all a part of one another, and that we can't lift ourselves up without lifting up everyone around the world. So we felt in New England there were a lot of international development organizations based here, and it was a good place to start. But the goal has always been to increase the amount of philanthropy going overseas and to help donors give more thoughtfully and more effectively, to learn from each other about great opportunities and great leaders like those of you on this call that deserve to be supported and funded in their work. So we're hoping, we're really endeavoring to make more change in the world by being that third pillar that provides the resources to make things happen.
Thank you so much for that. Another question that I think would be important, especially with the current events that we have, is how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted your work and all the boards you're on and the philanthropy that you're doing?
Sure. Well, before COVID hit the United States, all of our gatherings, the gatherings of our donors, were in person. And we were able to form very close and trusting relationships. And that kind of trust, as you know, is so important in your organizing on your campuses and in your communities. It's also really important between donors if you want to encourage donors to partner with each other. So we're not able to have those face-to-face meetings, but we have found that Zoom is unbelievably effective in fostering relationships. And in fact, it was MCN and Noah and Sam that pioneered this. They were the ones who first showed me how you can have a virtual graduation, how you can teach courses effectively in a virtual format. So we've started doing that as well. We have about 40 events per year. We run 2 giving circles. We run a symposium every other year. All of those things are now virtual, and it's been a boon to us because now we have donors joining us from all over the United States and even other countries. So there have been some silver linings, not to minimize the tremendous suffering in the world that this pandemic has caused.
That's great to hear. At least you're not slowing down. Things are still going.
Oh no. The need is greater. We have to do more.
That's great. And for any fellows here who are seeking strategies in terms of getting grants in the future or even now to advance the project, what advice would you give us?
Well, when people are starting, when they have a startup initiative, I really think that the best thing to do is to go to your family and friends, people who already admire you and trust you, and that will always be your base of support. And I'm sure Sam would agree that that's been the case for MCN as well. But as you grow, as you seek funding outside your own personal network, it's important to follow the rules. So a lot of funders, and I'm speaking now of foundations mainly, they have areas of focus. It might be geography, it might be a certain problem they want to solve, and they'll choose to fund a number of organizations that are addressing that problem in overlapping ways. So you need to do a lot of research, and there are tools online like funds for NGOs. Now that we can research anything on the internet, there's infinite possibilities in that way. But everybody finds that you have to find the sweet spot of a donor. You have to connect your mission with their life mission, with their life story, so that they feel impassioned to support you. And it's actually doing that listening with donors. It's eliciting what drives them, what gives their life meaning, and then connecting your life's meaning and your work to that can create the kind of powerful relationship that will sustain your work. But it's more about listening than pitching, in my opinion. It all starts with listening.
Okay, before I move on to my last question, I'd like to remind the fellows that the Q&A session is coming up. So any questions you might have for Karen, please leave them in the chat, and you'll be able to pose your questions to her once you get to that time. So I think my last question would be, from what you've just told us about the strategies to use when you're looking for a grant, is that what you use when you're looking for international leaders to help you in your journey?
Ooh, and are you talking about international leaders that are going to do the work in the field, or international leaders who are going to advise you about great organizations and strategies? Which are you?
I think maybe both. To be good to with both.
All right, so how do you find them, right? How do you find them? Well, in our network, which we call NEED, N-E-I-D, we find them a lot by talking to each other. Just as someone would say, hey, I just read a good book, you should buy this. We say, you wouldn't believe this person I just met. So there's a lot of that in the funding world, just peer-to-peer sharing and advising. But then there's many conferences. It's a whole ecosystem of affinity groups around different issues. There's a Global Fund for Human Rights, and there's grant makers for global health, and every topic you can imagine, grant makers for water, sanitation, and health. So those folks also have conferences, they have panels, they feature social impact leaders, they kibbutz amongst themselves, and that informs their grant making practice. And then a lot of individual donors have philanthropic advisors. Philanthropy meaning love of humanity, of course, but there's a whole industry around advising people about how to give away their money. So, and actually I was on an incredible conference call 2 weeks ago for the African Philanthropy Forum. And this was all led by philanthropists and NGOs in Africa. And I will tell you, it was mind-blowing. So for those of you who are on that continent, look that up, APF. And this year it was wide open. I mean, I think it only cost $100 to listen in, if even that. I mean, anybody could listen in. So you'll learn a lot through joining these online conferences.
Thank you, Karen. I think now we'll go on to the Q&A session from the fellows. So I'd like to invite Brooke Ramos to pose her question. And Brooke, before you begin, maybe tell us your name, your university, and the country you're from.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is
Brooke.
Hi. I am from North Carolina, USA. I go to the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. I'm also studying. Oh, Tahir is here. Tahir is in my cohort. I'm also studying political science, and I was wondering if you are familiar with social impact bonds, and if you are, if you envision them growing in popularity for building private-public partnerships to fund social initiatives in society.
That's a very sophisticated question. I am familiar, but maybe you would like to explain to everybody on the call what a social impact bond is, and then I can comment.
Okay. Yeah, my understanding is basically a private investor will front the money for a social initiative project of some sort. And if it fails, and they're a little bit hard to measure, like if the social impact project works, but if it fails, the private investor, they foot the bill, like they're responsible for the whole cost of the project. But if it's successful, then the government pays for it. And so usually like societies and cities and towns and whatever, they can rest knowing that like the social initiative was worth paying for because it was successful. And so they're called social impact bonds.
That is a fantastic explanation. So my understanding is that most of the social impact bonds that are available for investors today are in the United States or in the United Kingdom. I think it started in the United Kingdom with some funding for some efforts to try to prevent formerly incarcerated persons from going back to jail, recidivism. And that if those efforts worked, folks stayed out of jail, and so that saved the government money, and then the investors got repaid. It's a very, very sophisticated funder that will fund a social impact bond. And like I said, I have tried to explore what's out there in the developing world, and I'm not aware of what's actually in the developing world. So I don't think it's going to be the panacea funding approach. I think with some very large initiatives in the US, in Europe, it could be very valuable. But generally, you've got, the big foundations and some of the bilateral and multilateral development agencies that are investing in those at this time. Maybe your future is in helping those become more prolific and available to other funders. But it's a great concept. It's just, it's hard for the average donor to get their head around, or to have the sufficient funds to really invest in something that large.
I understand. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Brooke, for that very innovative question. It's good to, learn about new terms that most of us didn't know about. So thank you so much for that. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll call on you to pose your question. So before we move on to the next fellow, I have another question for Karen. How do you help philanthropists to center the values of empathy, humility, and inclusion?
Ooh, that's another wonderful question, Tara. So with our network, we have a mission, we have a vision statement, we have a strategic plan, and we have values we have enumerated, but we need to relook at them. And particularly in the light of the just incredibly growing awareness in the United States among donors of inequities in philanthropy, racial inequities, we are revisiting our value statement. So we actually incorporated humility and empathy because I learned that from Sam and Noha. So we incorporated that into our value statement several years ago. But I'm hoping we'll also incorporate equity, inclusion, anti-racism, things like that. In the US, there's been some research done about how much harder it is for organizations led by people of color to raise money, even from American donors, than it is for leaders of color raising money, even if both leaders are working in the same kind of community. There is an unconscious bias amongst white funders towards funding white leaders. The same, we believe, happens in international funding. Funders are just more comfortable funding someone, and I hate to be crass about this, but this is true, whose name they can pronounce, whose culture they can relate to, who went to a university in the United States where they went. These are all sort of unconscious things, but we need to consciously fight them. So in our organization, we are committed to doing that, and we're doing it by having webinars where we ask our funders to look at their own unconscious biases and how they're playing out in their global philanthropy. And we're also being more intentional about connecting our donor members with tremendous leaders who are on the ground in Africa and Latin America and in Asia, not just to the white social entrepreneurs in the United States that we come in contact with all the time because they have access to us. So to rebalance that, we have to make a special effort to make sure that the funding is going to people who come from the communities and who have lived the problems that they're seeking to solve, because they know how to do it, right? They've got the answers and they've got the drive and they're never going to leave, right? I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. It definitely does. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask, seeing as in recent years, the youth have become more vocal in trying to solve a number of issues in society and, trying to become better leaders, just as we are right now in the Millennium Fellowship. Have you found that there are more youth who are coming to you for grants to fund their projects, or is it still a bit of a lag in terms of the youth looking for funding?
I can't speak to that personally because as I mentioned, our family's funding goes to Haiti, and we have over the last 10 years, developed a portfolio of organizations we support. And I wouldn't say, frankly, any of them are led by youth. They may be empowering youth, but at this point, they're not led by youth. And that's something, now that you've asked that question, I need to look at that. I need to say, okay, are there some great youth leaders out there that we should be finding and investing in? So in terms of other funders in my network, I know a number of them that are very committed to funding education and entrepreneurship. So education for employment, let's say, and fund leadership development, like funders of the African Leadership Academy in South Africa. Or there's a program in Kenya called Education for All Children, which involves scholarships for college. So I know funders who are funding those scholarships. It's harder to find funders who fund just leadership development, and Sam and Nohawk, and we can all commiserate about that, because the funders tend to pick like one issue they want to fund or two issues. And the concept of funding just leaders that are working on, 17 issues is harder for donors to get their heads around, because they like to specialize.
That's great. Thank you so much, Karen. Another question is, you mentioned that you've been involved in social impact space for years. So how do you address challenges when faced with one?
I always know that there are people who are much smarter than I am. And have more direct experience. I'm the funder. I'm not the doer. I'm not the expert. I'm what Sam likes to call the sidekick that helps, great committed people like you do your work. So I go to advisors. I go to people who, have really developed expertise in the field, and they're usually people who are from the ground. So in Haiti, for instance, we helped start something called the Haiti Fund 10 years ago after the earthquake, and the executive director from that now runs something called the Haiti Development Institute, which trains grassroots leaders in Haiti. He is my principal advisor, right? I know I'm never going to fully understand Haiti. I never will, but he will. And so I trust his judgment.
Okay, there's another question here from a fellow. I'd like to invite Maimuna Suleiman to pose her question, please.
Thank you very much. And it has been a nice discussion. Hello, my name is Maimuna Suleiman from Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, Nigeria. A final year pharmacy student. I'm working on SDG 3. So I would like to ask this one question. If there's anything you could change in the philanthropy sector, what will it be? Thank you very much.
Oh, that's a moving question. I mean, first of all, I would wish that there was no need for philanthropy. The way I would wish that we didn't have the gross wealth inequality that we have in the world, an outgrowth of colonialism and capitalism, of course. But given that that is what we are dealing with at this point, I wish that more U.S. philanthropies would recognize the importance of funding global problems, and that there's so much money in the United States that's directed by families, and it goes to their alma maters, their colleges, their high schools, goes to their local hospitals, local schools. All of that is important to support the quality of life here in the United States. But there's so much more that can be accomplished if they direct their funding overseas. It just goes so much further and accomplishes so much more. So that's one thing. Then the other thing would be the dynamics of racism in philanthropy that I just mentioned to you. And that is a hard nut to crack because so much of it is unconscious, but there's tremendous momentum right now in the United States to deal with that. So I'm extremely hopeful, extremely hopeful.
Thank you, Karen, for that answer. And thank you, Maimuna, for that wonderful question you've asked. Another question I have here is, what have you learned from the relationships you've built in Haiti, and why has it been a sustained focus for you?
Oh, goodness. I have one footnote to Maimuna's question first. I wish that raising money was less complicated. I wish that there was more uniformity in the application processes and that funders join more together. It's really challenging, I know, for social impact leaders to raise money. Anyway, back to Haiti and what I have learned from the leaders in Haiti. Was that your question, Tara? Yeah. I have to confess that when the earthquake happened, I really didn't know hardly anything about Haiti. I knew a little bit about the history of oppression there. I knew that that Haitians had rebelled in the late 1700s against their French colonizers and oppressors and became the first independent Black republic. I knew that Haiti had had a string of really brutal dictators for a couple hundred years, but I didn't know much more. So I went on a steep learning curve. And again, when we started the Haiti Fund, which was embedded at the Boston Foundation, a community foundation, because Boston has the third largest concentration of Haitians in the United States, we went immediately to the Haitian Americans around us, and we set up an advisory council. We set up a grant-making committee and an advocacy committee that were predominated by Haitian Americans. Those who not only had the knowledge, the cultural expertise, the language, the connections, the passion, but they had the right to direct philanthropic resources to Haiti. It's not, it's not the fault of Haitian Americans or any recent immigrant group in the United States that they haven't been able to amass a lot of capital through housing and other equity to be large philanthropic players. It's not their fault, it's because of systemic racism. So it just seemed right that if you've got a fund and you're raising money from the public, you should put the power in the hands of Haitians who are trying to rebuild their country. So that's what I learned. I learned that they know much more than I do, and they have tremendous dedication towards making their homeland a better place for everyone to live in, and a place with more justice and human rights.
Your answer actually reminded me of something that we learned during the training sessions of the Millennium Fellowship on community mapping, where you start with those closest to you before you reach out to bigger people. So yeah, that's really
I wish I could take that course with you. I wish I was a Millennium Fellow. Nobody ever told me about community mapping. Lucky you.
Thank you very much. But it's thanks to you and the rest of Team MCM that we're able to learn these things. So we really appreciate it. And there's another question here from Lucy Branstra. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. Maybe Lucy, you can pose your question, tell us your name, the university you're from, and which country you're from.
Yes, it's Lucy Brandstrader, but no worries at all. So yes, I'm in Los Angeles, California, USA at Loyola Marymount University. And just something I was wondering, I'm actually taking a grant writing class right now about how to write grants. And so a lot of the stuff you've mentioned has kind of, intersected with what I'm learning. And a big thing, what we learn and what you mentioned is how you need to cater kind of to the donor's interest and make sure you're, doing something that they're passionate about as well. And so I kind of wanted to just know more about, from a donor or a funder's point of view, what are some of the steps they take to kind of narrow down what they're looking for and like figure out their target audience? Is it just like conversations they have? Do they do like workshops? I don't really know. Just curious about that.
Absolutely wonderful. There, as I mentioned, there's a number of, sort of affinity groups, networks, funder networks. For instance, there's one called the National Council for Family Philanthropy. There's another one called Exponent, which is Association of Small Foundations. There's another network called Synergos, another one called the Philanthropy Workshop. I went through a program run by the Philanthropy Workshop, which was for philanthropists to help them become more strategic. And what they taught us was you need to develop your own personal mission statement and vision statement, just like an NGO would, and then your own theory of change. So if you, and also just to back up, identify the problem you want to solve, and then develop your theory of change for how you want to solve it. Really, it's how those you fund are going to solve it. But it's a very deliberate process where you think about, okay, am I going to fund this problem of, let's take girls empowerment through scholarships for education in primary school or secondary school or college? Or am I going to fund girls empowerment by making sure that they have access to sex education and contraceptives? Am I going to make sure that that we're addressing sexual abuse? You could go on and on, but a funder, when they're becoming more than just a checkbook writer, more than just a reactionary donor, usually they develop a strategy. And usually they do that in a course, an association, or with a philanthropic advisor that helps them do that. And part of the reason they have to do that is, one, for more impact, actually a word that I don't really like to use very much, but for more effectiveness. But the other is to have a way to say no. When you are out there, when you're public as a funder, you can be bombarded by requests from wonderful people doing incredibly important work, and you just can't fund it all. So if you have a strategy, you can narrow that down and say, sorry, I don't do this, I don't do that, I only work here, I only do scholarships, or I only do bricks and mortar for schools or whatever. So you know, unfortunately, every donor is somewhat different in how they go about developing their strategy. But most of the ones I know do that.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Thanks very much, Lucy.
Lucy, thank you for your question. And our next question will be from Elizabeth Nagudi. Elizabeth, kindly introduce yourself. Tell us the university you're from and the country too.
Hello, Elizabeth. I'm from Uganda. Currently at African Leadership University. I'm offering global challenges. This is a very interesting conversation, and I love whatever is taking place right now. First of all, I would like to ask, have you been engaged in a sports philanthropic funding, and what issue was it solving in the community? If yes, what impact did it have on the community beyond sports? I have a second question about theory of change. While ideating my project, does the theory of change have to always be disruptive, or I can always come up with a good practice from my observation? Like from what I've observed from the community, does it have to always be disruptive, like my idea, or I can always come up with a good practice? Thank you.
Okay, wow. Thank you for that question. I'm not totally sure I understand the last part. Does your theory of change always have to be disruptive? In other words, does it have to be something completely new that changes power dynamics? Is that what you mean by that question?
Yes, that's what I mean. Like, does it have to be completely new and like it's a new idea solving that issue?
I don't think so. So first of all, I don't have a lot of experience funding sports for social change or sports for community development. I was aware of a program in Haiti, I think it was called Goals, which did use, well, I've been aware of several soccer programs in Haiti that have used soccer as a way to build trust in the community and build confidence, particularly in girls. So one of my daughters, when she was in high school, she went to Haiti and she helped coach girls soccer. Now, these are girls who had never had a uniform, never had a soccer ball, never had played a group sport. Many of these girls dropped out of school in 6th grade. So you can imagine how important that experience was for them. And also, it was really important to gain the respect from the boys that these girls could actually play a sport. There was a lot of jealousy. There was a lot of jealousy that ensued at that point. So I've seen a lot of programs like that. There's another one called Soccer Without Borders that actually comes out of the United States, and it helps immigrant youth here in the United States gain self-confidence and trust and belonging through sports here. And they also have the program in a number of other countries as well. But I personally haven't funded in that area. And then your question about theory of change being disruptive. No, I think some of the most effective theories of change could be ones that are proven successful. You know, let's just come up with an example. You know, one theory of change would be to improve access to water systems by developing local water committees that have control over the new well or the latrines or the wash stations in their community and are skilled and empowered to repair them when something goes wrong. That's a theory of change. By investing in the water committees, I am ensuring that these water systems will have longevity. You know, by doing this, X will happen. But no, I don't think it has to be disruptive the way you're describing it.
Thank you so much for that. And Elizabeth, thank you for that question. Mm-hmm. I'd actually never thought of philanthropy being sectioned into such, you know, defined areas. So that was very informative. Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. So I think we can move on to maybe the last question before move on to the closing remarks. And this question is, what advice might you have for Millennium Fellows who want to work in philanthropy?
Ooh, I love that question. I hope some of you do work in philanthropy, because, I mean, you've got the drive, you've got the knowledge, you've got the life experience. We need more of you. And our International Donor Network actually had considered creating a fellowship, particularly for people of color and people from the Global South, to learn about global philanthropy and to move into this field, because there are not nearly enough. So what advice about getting into the field? You know, I think I'm going to need to think about it and blog about it to come up with the answer. But anything that you're doing now is relevant. And then there are courses in philanthropy. For instance, Indiana University has a program where you can get a master's in philanthropy. I think you can do it online. You know, there's courses at a place called Johnson Center, Grand Valley State University in Michigan. And they run workshops on philanthropy, like proposal analysis, how to analyze the financials in a proposal. Also, your local community foundations could be incredible resources for you. So I know there's a very vibrant Kenya Community Foundation. I don't know if there's a Nigeria one, but there likely is. The center that is helping to develop these is out of South Africa. It's called the Global Fund for Community Foundation. So Community Foundation invests in leaders and programs from that community. And they usually have training programs there for NGO leaders on how to write grants, but also be an incredible place to do internships or get trained on how to be a grant maker, how to evaluate proposals. Those folks are at your fingertips.
Thank you so much for that. That's definitely something to look into, especially for most of us with the way we've been going with the Millennium Fellowship. So I know I said that was the last question, but we have another question from another fellow. Okay. So I'd like to invite Zedzor Sunu Atta to please ask the question.
Okay. Hello. Jijo Amasunu Atta. I'm from Kenya University in Ghana. I wanted to know what strategies you use to foster and maintain relationships with supporters and people that share mutual interest with you in philanthropy.
So what strategies I use with other donors, you know, like my peers, or as a board member of an organization, what strategies to maintain relationships with the donors to that organization? Maybe that's what you mean.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the concept of stewardship of donors is very, very important. And I can't say I always do it well or that many do it well, because it takes time. So once someone gives to you, that it's much easier to get a second gift from them than to find a brand new donor. But that means you have to invest in those donors. You have to cultivate relationships. You have to visit them at times when you're not asking for money at all. You're just talking to them about their lives. You're talking to them about your life and your work. You're explaining to them what great successes you've just had and what challenges you're facing. The more I think you let the donors in on the real world challenges of your organization and work, the more they're going to feel like they're a part of it. Because a lot of donors here, I mean, they're living vicariously through you. They're fulfilling their own life purpose. They're bringing meaning to their life through you. So the more you can stay in conversation with them and be honest and transparent with them, I think the better. You might lose a few donors along the way when you share what's really going on, but for the most part, I think they'll want to really invest and help you with your problems. So the other thing that I think is overlooked a lot is creating a sense of community amongst the donors. So when one donor gets to know another donor to the same organization, they start to feel like family, right? And they have a sense that they're in this together, and they want to keep funding together. They want to make it a success together. So if you can link them to each other somehow, you know, through blogs, through webinars, through informal coffees online, I think it's a win. Does that get at what you were thinking, what you were wondering about, Isidore?
Yes, yeah? Yes. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I think maybe one last question that I think will be very important from Aska Amor. Maybe introduce yourself, your name, university and country, then ask your question.
Yes, thank you, Tara. Thank you, Karen, for this conversation. It's very interesting. So I have one question about how one deals with negativity, because I remember when I went to do my project. Oh, sorry, I was supposed to introduce myself. So my name is Aska Judith Amor. I am from the University of Nairobi, Kenya. Nairobi, Kenya. Yeah, forgive me. I just ran through it, kind of lost my train of thoughts. I was saying, I remember when I really went to start my project, I was really, really interested and really psyched. So I got into the community I was working with, and the first person I met, I introduced to them what my project was. And one of the things they told me it was very negative. It was, okay, let me phrase it nicely. These people you should not help these people because they might become complacent. And when I had that, I really sat down and thought, how do I deal with something like that? Because I was really interested in bringing change. And when maybe someone tells you, when you're doing such changes, it makes people not want to work, and it makes people want to become more dependent. I really didn't know how to answer them firstly, and actually whether, you know, so how does one deal with such things where you want to bring a change and the people who really don't see or really don't understand why you want to do such things?
Wow, thank you for asking that. Could you just clarify again? You said that you were really interested in working on femicide. I couldn't hear the last word. What was it you wanted to work on in that community? Did I lose you, Aska? You have to unmute.
Yes, let me unmute her one more second.
Yeah.
Aska should be unmuted now.
Okay, so I was working with refugees.
Refugees. Okay.
Kenya has the largest refugee camp.
Yes.
In Kakuma, and when I really wanted to partner with the refugee and the host community, and when I went there, that's what happened to me. But I shoved off the negativity and did my project, but I don't want to forget the thought that kept on running into my mind based on what I was told.
I don't have an easy answer for you. It's very deflating, I think, when you run into someone who has that mindset. And of course, that's a prevailing mindset around the world. I think storytelling is perhaps the most effective way to deal with that. And that's why I was saying at the beginning that if you learn about communications, you will be invaluable to any NGO. If you can help to tell the stories of real individual people. So, you take the story of, someone who's come from Somalia into Kakuma or Dadaab and what they've been through in their life and how hard they're working to show their resilience and to survive, and also to relocate someplace where they can work hard. But I think you can't just make generalizations. You have to share stories. There's a fantastic book that we read in our network called City of Thorns. And it's about the lives of 9 different refugees from the Horn of Africa who ended up in Dadaab. It's their real life stories. This was written by a journalist who had been with Human Rights Watch. And it was so eye-opening for me to read. For instance, I had no idea there was so much enterprise in a refugee camp. There's so many businesses there. Certainly told about the struggles, but it also told about the incredible character of people in the camps. So books, storytelling, videos, all of that's really important. Make it real, because people psychologically, there have been studies shown that when you hear about vast numbers of people in need, you don't respond as readily as when you hear about one person in need. Then you give, and you give. But I'm sorry you had that experience, and we're all dealing with that.
Thank you so much, Aska, for your question, and thank you, Karen, for that. It's, I think, going to help a lot of us whenever we deal with negativity, and it's a good strategy for us to use in our project. I know I certainly can use that in mine, so thank you very much. So we've come towards the end of our webinar today, and I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today, taking time out of your busy schedule to, talk to us and advise us and give us all this information. We really appreciate it. And if there's a way that we can reach you, be it via email, maybe you can put it in the chat for us.
I will put it in the chat right now, and I would be honored to hear from any of you. And I really thank you for some very thought-provoking questions that I'm going to take with me to the board of New England International Donors. Oops, did I lose you? No. And Tara, you are gifted at communication. This is a fantastic role for you. So I hope you're weaving that in along with your work around global health data collection, which I know you've got. That's your project, which is equally important. But the way you tell the story about why it's important, the way you interview people who are working on it, will make a big impact, a really big impact. Thank you. I'm so impressed. Thank you, Noha, for just your flawless technical facilitation and planning for this. And of course, to Sam for his vision and drive for making this happen. For what? How many applicants now for next year, Noha? 18,000? What did I read?
we're on track. We're for the class of 2021. We're at 6,000 plus, but we're 6, on track to very excited for the class of 2021.
So all of you who are in the program are really exceptional, because I know that there was stiff competition for you all. So I know you'll do great things in the world. Thank you for letting me be a little tiny part of it. And I hope you all have a great day. Or evening, wherever you are.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the fellows who've joined us today. Thank you also to Team MCN for organizing this. And I'd just like to remind the fellows that the last webinar will be held on Wednesday, on the 25th of November, at the same time with Susan Finnegan from MINTS. If you want to learn about her career path in law and how to create change within the private sector, feel free to sign up and join. And it's been an honor being your moderator for today. So bye, guys.
Sure. Thank you.